Good evening. You're watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. I'm with Dave Frank. My name is Eric Kirk. We are talking the news, national news of the day. Some of the biggest political news is coming out of the January 6th committee. I think the biggest news are the revelations of Mark Meadows' emails. We will talk a little bit about Mark Meadows himself, but they have released some of his emails. We don't know all too much about who sent them. We do know one. We'll talk a little bit about that. But there are some very interesting, well, I won't call them bombshells because they're not that big surprise, but some very interesting comments from members of Congress, from Fox News anchors, well, not even anchors, but commentators, asking Trump, saying, "Hey, stop this! Please stop this!" From his son Don Jr. to actually, Mark Meadows. I don't know why he isn't talking to his own father, but saying we need to put a stop to this. This is not what's supposed to be happening, and this is bad news. I mean, and pleading him put a stop to this. Those same Fox News people don't seem to be talking about their own comments very much. They seem to be avoiding this. Republicans are basically saying, "Oh, this is just another attempt to get at Trump," and are basically, trying to downplay this, but. Obviously, the January 6th committee has a reason for releasing this stuff. They have Congresswoman Cheney doing on the forefront of releasing these emails, and they talk about and the representatives talk about everything from how Vice President Pence should be rejecting the electors to apologies for having failed to do so the next day, revealing some involvement from within the House that is something that most of us kind of assumed, but now we are seeing it not technically on paper, in e-paper, if you will. But Dave, what are the revelations?
So this is, you did a great job of setting it up. I watched some of this unfold in the media, and it really riveted my attention because you and I had talked about this a while back, that when they have the macro information, the metadata about who called whom, and when, that we would see who was involved. But now with Mark Meadows having turned over in the preliminary stages of the conversation with the January 6th committee, he had turned over some of the material that they'd asked for. He actually turned over texts. So they not just the committee doesn't have the committee has more than just who and when and where. They have the what also. And so Mark Meadows, we'll talk about him as an individual a little bit later. He is now realizing he's in the crosshairs for potential criminal liability, or at least that's his position. So now he's saying, "Hey, I refuse to actually give any feedback or testimony about the material that I've turned over." So he's taken a turn away from the focus of what you and I are addressing here, and it's like, well, what actually was said? So it was a few people who were in Congress and a few people who were Fox News commentators, like you said. So Laura Ingraham and Sean Hannity were two of the key people who are very, their creative impetus of their shows were to, from the very beginning, defend the president and his prerogatives, and all the people who were there during the, quote unquote insurrection, if you watch a different channel. But certainly the storming of the Capitol is what we all witnessed. It was happening live.
And to be fair about the Fox News, Hannity and Ingram, they're like saying, "Whoa, slow down, stop this, please."
Yeah.
They're not. I don't blame them for that. That they're kind of not addressing it now is a little bit cheesy, but yeah.
Or never, right? So from the minute that they sent those texts saying, "This is not a good thing. This is bad for the president. It's bad for the party. It's bad for the movement." You guys, basically going to Meadows, knowing he's the only person standing there next to President Trump, who's the only person with the real stature and authority and positioning to do something about what was happening and unfolding on that day. We talked about the 3 hours of silence or last week when we talked about the National Guard non-response. This is that window of time where people inside the house were sending him messages saying, like, this is bad, like, they're coming for us, you got to stop this. We're hearing crickets on that aspect of it, but also the Fox team and the political thinkers that, hey, this is bad, you got to stop this, and we haven't heard anything. Like you just said, we not only did we not hear anything at the time, we heard the up until today, but we heard the opposite. We heard a strategy of defense of the innocence or also the projection of the responsibility onto whether it was an inside job like a false flag operation or whether it was Antifa who were anti-fascist, they were against the president. Right. Why would they storm the Capitol to defend him and push through this thing to block the vote? And then finally, like you said, a lot of the messages that were read by Liz Cheney from the House presenting this yesterday or 2 days ago now was that she was basically saying, like, the members of Congress had said, hey, our plan isn't working. We're doing everything that we can. So there's multiple layers of liability and potential criminal behavior that was unveiled in what appeared to be just a casual reading of texts.
Yeah, I mean, and of course, if it's Antifa, what could Trump have done about it, right? I mean, they're talking about this. It's amazing that not one Antifa person has been busted in all of this time, but, it doesn't matter. The facts don't matter. It's just amazing. But it is going to be very interesting because they are going to read these names. Now, Jordan's not a surprise at all, but is this going to lead to any type of either criminal or at least in-house discipline against these members? Now, it doesn't. The emails themselves don't reveal a crime, but they do reveal an inside aspect that they were trying to overturn an election. I mean, that was it.
Can you tell us what you were alluding to when you said Jordan's name? I don't think you fleshed that out.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, we talked about it. Yes, the Federalist came out with a really strange opinion piece today. Somehow they knew where it came from, in which they accused Adam Schiff, who held a press conference about it, of manipulating a text message. And basically, they said he cut it in half. And because if you read the second half, it references the fact that the theory that Pence could, in fact, reject electors that he deems unconstitutional is a legal theory of somebody else's. So basically they're saying that he's sending a text to Meadows saying he could do this, and it was somebody else's idea, and therefore that would have mitigated it. And Schiff is making it sound like it was Jordan's idea, and therefore that's bad. And yeah, I guess making it sound like Jordan has the brain to think up anything on his own is, making him look bad. I don't know, but it was just so that was it. But in doing this, they accidentally revealed that it was his text, so he's been outed. But they're all going to be outed soon anyway, so I guess it doesn't really matter. But I don't think that the Federalist was supposed to do that. It's a right-wing legal magazine. Certainly, they're going to get in a little bit of trouble for that within their ranks.
Which is interesting because as we covered last week, it's pretty well known that there was a legal team nationwide pushing this issue of trying to overturn the election outcome in courts, like, for example, in Pennsylvania and Arizona and I think Wisconsin and Georgia and maybe some other places too. And there are people who have taken credit already for that legal argument, and are in the crosshairs of the committee, the January 6th committee. So for the Federalists to come out and then try to protect Jordan, saying, "Oh, well, that wasn't his idea," like you said, I don't think that doesn't answer the critique that he was involved in pushing this issue along to Mark Meadows, knowing that he's the president's chief of staff. It doesn't really defend anybody from anything other than say, remember us, it was one of our guys who did this.
Yeah, anyway, we'll come back to that because these are going to be big, but we need to move on to the next topic, which is related. All right. Well, this is all, of course, comes from the document production of Mark Meadows. He, of course, was supposed to follow up with a deposition where he was going to be asked questions about all of the documents. And of course, he gave a lot more information than just these emails. I mean, he gave a lot of information there, and he was cooperative up until a certain point. I'm not sure whether or not it was a legal strategy to stop being cooperative or whether or not he got pressure from Trump to stop being cooperative, because it seemed to coincide with the point where he turned around and basically said that his book is fake news for revealing that Trump had a positive COVID test. I don't know if he got pressure from Trump or pressure from his attorneys to back out of the deposition. At any rate, he is not being cooperative, and so did not honor the subpoena to come and take the deposition. So he has been referred by Congress by a near partisan vote, the two Republicans, Kinzinger and Cheney, voting with the Democrats, all the other Republicans voting against, referred to Merrick Garland at the DOJ for criminal contempt charges, just like Bannon. So now it's the second referral from the committee. We can discuss a little bit about whether or not Meadows is citing presidential privilege because he's saying that there are privileged communications that would be asked about. He's got some problems. First of all, both he and Bannon have the basic problem that Trump is no longer president. So can a non-sitting president even claim privilege, and can they do that? That's an open question when the existing president is not claiming president. That's a question that needs to be resolved. Bannon was talking about communications that didn't happen when he wasn't even an aide to the president. Meadows was an aide, but the problem he has is that he's already given all the documents talking about the communications we're talking about. So there's a rule that when the cat's out of the bag, you don't get to claim privilege anymore. You've already given up the information that was privileged, so now you're bound to talk about it. So he's got a problem. So we'll see, what the courts do with it. Dave?
Yeah. So thank you again for setting that up so well. This is exactly kind of where we stand, and I think they're trying to thread the needle here. The Meadows legal team, in part because he is the chief of staff, was the chief of staff to the president, and therefore it's plausible that a great deal of their communications were in fact privileged. At least, I call that the theory of potential plausibility. If you make a claim that has some potential basis in fact, that at least gives you standing in court to try. But what we found in the Stop the Steal legal efforts were that judges pushed back pretty hard, saying, hey, look, these claims that you're making are not even close, and some of those lawyers are reprimanded. I think this is a high enough stakes game that in fact it's reminiscent somewhat of Watergate, where Nixon's chief of staff was also in the crosshairs. So they know what they're dealing with here. Trump wants to run for president again, by all tokens, all indicators and everything else we're hearing and seeing. And in fact, like Lindsey Graham over the weekend came out and gave a statement in national media, basically saying that any Republican leader who is not on the side of Trump is missing the train. That every Republican needs to realize he's their guy still. So Lindsey Graham, you don't have to agree with him or believe him, but just realize that that's part of the dialogue going on in the leadership. Now, he was talking about the context of Senator McConnell from Kentucky, the leader of the minority, the leader of the Republicans in the House. I don't know if they're the minority, if it's 50-50, but basically he gave he helped pass a bill that allowed Republicans to kind of sidestep the filibuster and let the debt ceiling be raised, which both sides wanted. So Lindsey Graham just came out and said, look, don't. Sorry, I said the House. I meant the Senate. So yeah, that leader of the Republicans in the Senate. So he took some heat for sidestepping the process of the filibuster and allowing the debt ceiling to be raised, even though both parties want it. The Trump was tweeting all weekend about how awful it is to give the Democrats an inch. But McConnell's position is, well, if you give them this, then they're going to hurt themselves. But anyway, the point is that Trump still has the ear of a select few group, a few leaders out there, and in this case, I think that's what we're talking about is his chief of staff, Mark Meadows. He's got to follow Trump's lead on this and stick with the claims that there's privilege, because that's what his team is demanding of him.
Yeah. I don't want to get sidetracked, but Biden's poll numbers have been ticking up slightly lately, and McConnell today praised Biden's response in Kentucky, which is very unusual. I'm wondering if Trump is what he's gonna do. He may just, if he's smart, he'll just stay shut up, but I'm not sure he can do that. So we'll see. But next week we'll talk about that.
Yeah. I think we should distract off of Meadows. Sorry.
Yeah, no, we got to stick with Meadows. Now there's been a little bit of criticism because Merrick Garland took a long time before he made the decision with regard to Bannon. He take a long time before he makes the decision with Meadows. I think it's an unfair criticism. I know people are anxious. They're worried that this is a tactic of the pro-Trump people and Republicans to run out the clock, for next year, but this isn't slowing down the committee. The committee is going to move forward no matter what. Once these charges are filed, they don't stop. Even if the committee wraps up, those charges are going to go forward no matter what. If Merrick Garland says they are, Congress has no jurisdiction to say to Merrick Garland, "Oh, you have to drop those charges now." It's they're filed. They can go. So he can take as much time as he wants, and you want to do it right. You want to investigate. You want to make sure you've got the law and everything on your side. You don't want to rush into these things. That's where you get into trouble, right? That's where you end up in these things. Garland is not, he doesn't act. He's not a knee-jerk actor. There is criticism of Garland that he's limited his power to only acting on it as a reaction to Congress's contempt of court, and he's not conducting criminal investigations. But we don't know that. So that's my thing. We don't know what he's doing. It's not like, he's not a type of person who's going to go out and say, I am conducting a criminal investigation of, because that puts people on notice. So we don't know what he's doing. So I'm actually one of those people who are who will tell you, we don't know. You can't criticize. Give him the benefit of the doubt. If he really is, not doing his job, we'll know later, but you can't base it on what you are seeing or not seeing in the news.
Yeah, and I know we don't have much time left on this topic, but I do think it's worth mentioning too here in closing that this all is going to play out. Like the communications, they all happened a year ago almost. Mm-hmm. This interim period between November elections, last year, and January when this all happened. Those communications, it was like a slow moving train wreck between the people that wanted to believe that the election was fraudulent and the people that wanted to do something about it through civic protest and activity in the city. Like I said, there's a lot of stuff that I've seen in sort of fringe media that talks about how all this was coordinated. But now I think it's gonna play out. And if Trump truly is the linchpin of it all, obviously as the president, I mean he's the hyper ego and the full throttle throttle down guy on all this. It has implications for whether he will be eligible to become president again. So they have to be very, very careful. And Meadows is the top catch here. He's the only person that could, not the only one, but he's the key person to unlocking all of the conspiracy as far as this goes.
Right. And there is a lot going on with the January 6th committee, too. They are talking to people. They are taking depositions. I mean, there is a lot of information coming in. We don't know what's happening. We're just getting tips what they want to release to the public. I'm forgetting the names of people. There are people suing the January 6th. Trump is suing them, but so is Meadows. So is Eastman. I mean, they wouldn't be doing that if they weren't worried. If this was all just going to fall apart, they would not be filing those lawsuits. They are worried about what's going to happen, and so they're trying to get to block certain things. They're trying to get their documents back. They're trying to do a lot of different things. And anyway, well, we will be talking a lot more about this, and probably for months to come.
The Court of Appeals here in Washington has ruled quickly in our favor. We are getting a clearer picture of what happened, who was involved and who paid for it, and where the money went.
Mr. Meadows received numerous text messages, which he has produced without any privilege claim, imploring that Mr. Trump take the specific action we all knew his duty required.
We do not take this vote lightly, but this committee and this Congress is left with no other alternative when, in the midst of an investigation of this magnitude, we are stonewalled at every turn by those who played a central role in the planning and execution of the January 6th attack.
The committee favorably report to the House the committee's report on a resolution recommending that the House of Representatives find Mark Randall Meadows in contempt of Congress.
Okay, that takes us to the topic of huge spending that doesn't seem to bother people who are concerned about inflation or deficits or anything. We have now set a new record of spending for defense. I believe it's $768 billion. And they sent a spending package passed bipartisan of $25 billion more dollars than Biden asked for. And part of it to, get this, keep up with inflation. I mean, $25 billion to keep up with inflation. How about the inflation that $25 billion is going to cause? Because unlike, the Build Back Better and all of that, this is going to be spent in 1 year. I mean, nobody talks about it. Nobody talks about, they call it, and this is where I really get irritated with the media. Some of the media doesn't refer to it as Build Back Better or the social spending bill or even the reconciliation bill. Some of them are referring to it as the spending bill. The so-called liberal media refers to it as the spending bill. And we'll talk about that later, but here we have, military bill that's still premised on a Cold War that no longer exists. I mean, really, the war with China is not going to be fought with guns. It's an economic war, really. The war is not profitable. We're talking about basically a state-based capitalist system and whatever ours is at this point, crony capitalism, and it's not. This is not necessary. We have a history of what Eisenhower referred to as the Congressional Military Industrial Complex. It was a Republican who came up with that term, Republican who would probably be considered flaming liberal by now, at least in those types of issues. And we've had numerous items throughout our history of where the Pentagon has said, we don't need that, but because some Congress people need the jobs in their particular districts and they have a lot of influence, we end up making those items anyway. And so we have a bloated budget, and nobody wants to talk about the inflationary effect. Well, I won't say nobody. There is bipartisan opposition to it, but minimal. You got your Bernie Sanders, and the squad and all of them, but on the left, and you got a few people on the right, Rand Paul or whatever. But most of the people are bipartisan, are voting for this, and nobody wants to challenge it. Nobody wants to talk about it in terms of deficits or anything. And it's the biggest item of spending any time, and it's just, we just pass it without any discussion of that whatsoever. And we've just passed another record-breaking one, and the media is like almost silent. I don't even think it's on page 1 of half the newspapers. Dave.
Yeah. It's just one of those things. It's like the seasons. It's going to come around, and it's gonna pass, and it's got its own inertia and momentum. In part, as we talked about once before, like every congressional district has some defense contractor there. That's by design. That's to help with the the log rolling that's required to move these things through the legislative process. The total top line number was actually 777 billion, because on top of the 768, there's that other 9 billion that goes to Defense Department spending outside of the Defense Department,
Okay.
which is so it's just a little, it's a record plus. So when we talk about this defense spending, we typically say it's 700 billion, but now it's gone up by 10%, and no one's really even thought much about it. To the extent that anybody thought about it, I guess in the Senate it was 88 to 11, and in the House it was 363 to 70. So it's solid, strong majorities of both chambers. I did see a text from Pramila Jayapal, who's the chair of the House Congressional Progressive Caucus, and her quote is, "We ended the longest war in U.S. history, yet Congress just passed a $768 billion defense budget, more than the military budgets of the next 11 countries combined."
Yes.
So for context, and so some of these extra, sorry, to finish her quote, "Don't tell me we can't afford to fight poverty, cancel student debt, pass paid leave, and defeat the climate crisis." So that's, to me, that's sort of the big political question is,
Right.
How is it that spending, say 170 billion a year on a major post-COVID stimulus package is going to ruin the economy, but spending 6 times that or 5 times that per year on our military is not something that we even consider. So that gives some credence to what she had said. And one last thing I'll mention here is a lot of the reason it goes up each year is because most of these programs, no one wants them to end. So even if, like you said, if the military decides they want them to end, they keep going. But more than that, it's the hot button issues. There's participation in grandstanding. So right now there's a lot of talk against Russia and a lot of talk about China for lots of reasons, which we don't have to debate the merits here in this forum. But just mentioning China and mentioning Russia, that's an extra 13, 14 billion in spending that they tacked on because somebody got up and was doing some grandstanding about those two topics.
Yeah, I mean, where's Manchin demanding a CBO analysis of the inflationary impact of this, right? I mean, he just is dead silent. He's obsessed with the CBO analysis of Build Back Better. He didn't really ask about it for the other bill, right? I mean, he's obsessed with it for, child tax credit. I mean, it's just the hypocrisy is just so blatant and ridiculous. And it is not necessary. It is absolutely appalling. And there really needs to be the progressives and the libertarian right need to really find a way to make this a fight at some point. They really need to come up with a strategy to attack this. I don't know how, because it's just, it is so wrapped up, our economy is so wrapped up in it, but there needs to be discussion of conversion of it. Part of the problem is the military is kind of covering up for itself and protecting itself. It's becoming more, climate change oriented, right? They're like, they're making that, so they're saying, hey, we're addressing that issue, right? So we're the only industry that's really doing it. We're doing it without having Congress try to pass this stuff. So you don't want to see more of that, do you? Right? I mean, it's just it is absolutely ridiculous, and they're still making howitzers. I mean, somebody once told me, howitzer, they say, well, it's state-of-the-art howitzers, but a state-of-the-art howitzer in a modern military conflict, he said, would be about as effective as a state-of-the-art crossbow. It just has absolutely no bearing on it, but we still make them because there's a factory somewhere that, it makes jobs. has jobs, but we don't worry about the jobs for for everything else that's going somewhere, that makes products that we actually could use or sell. I mean, it's just, and I guess that their argument probably is, well, it's not really inflationary because we're not making products people actually buy. They just go sit on the shelf for 20 years until we get rid of them and replace them, right? I mean, I just, hopefully anyway. We've got to, we have to renew that movement to disarm. But the Cold War ended, and I remember Margaret Thatcher in a panic saying, "Oh no, the Cold War is not over," because they were in a panic because they were worried about the economic impact of it.
Well, so you're talking about the peace dividend. People
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm old enough to remember when we were supposed to have a peace dividend at the end of the Cold War as a way, that we had made these massive investments over a multi-decade period, and that there was going to be some light at the end of the tunnel about how we could reinvest in the United States. The military spending didn't go down. Investment in the United States has not been extraordinarily, contemporaneous. Like they haven't been keeping up with the demand, like the vast majority of our bridges are in disrepair, etc. So there is, we don't have a rural, we don't have a universal broadband in place like people have aspired to for a while, although that's changing now that, since COVID. But one thing I want to mention too is just as a practical matter, I was raised in a military household and always was aware of the foreign policy demands placed on our country. And so right now we hear a tremendous amount about Russia building up on the border of Ukraine and how that's, it's an amazing threat to the world order, etc. Well, when they invaded Crimea and took over the port there, I remember Henry Kissinger, who's no peacenik, said, "Look, it's a strategic imperative of theirs to have that port, and if that's their number one priority, and it's not our number one priority, we're not going to go to war over it. They're going to take it." And so now we have a very similar question that we have in mind when it comes to threats from China and its neighbors in the South China Sea, or Russian threats on the border of Ukraine right now. Last thought on this is that they're talking about an economic devastating G7 coordinated defense of Russia right now. A defense of Ukraine against Russia. They're saying a military confrontation's off the table with Russia. And so if they're already saying that effectively, or at least signaling it, then this is all really about muscle flexing as opposed to strategic engagement.
All right. Move on to the next topic. I've already ranted about Manchin, but Build Back Better and the voting rights bill. Democrats were hoping to pass both of them by the end of the year. Looks like voting rights is dead in the water. Cinema today basically came back and said, no movement on the filibuster. We are not going to reform the filibuster for voting rights. Sorry, people who are not white, you don't get to vote. That's just the way it is. Sorry, that's my position. We're not going to bend it just so that you can vote. So that's her position. Manchin is now reneging on his deal. They were going to cut back. He is looking for a way to tank Build Back Better. He was using the inflation report as an excuse for a while there, 6.8%, whatever it was. But he's been shown apparently that if anything, Build Back Better could be anti-inflationary because it could deal with a lot of the supply chain issues, and it spends small amounts every year, and really isn't an inflationary issue, but he wants to cut into some of this stuff, and he had made an agreement that the child tax credit would be extended for 1 year. Well, of course, what he knows is what everybody else knows, is that if it gets extended for 1 year, it's going to be extended for another year and another year and another year because nobody's going to want to kill it. So what he wants it done is he wants it in the bill to be extended for 10 years and wants that to be factored into the billing, and so that it has to be accounted for in funding. And therefore, unless they come up with new taxing, the funding for it will have to come out of other projects, as in, all that green stuff that he doesn't like anyways, that might, affect his fossil fuel investments and all of that, and stuff. So he wants wants it back, the 10 years back. He's like, makes it sounding like, hey, I want to lock in for all these poor families 10 years. But it's a really cynical thing. He'd already agreed on it. Literally, he and Biden had shaken on it. It's not going well, according to Biden, the discussions. He's basically reneging on an agreement he made. The squad are saying, this is why we shouldn't have given up the negotiation advantage by passing the other infrastructure bill. This is exactly what we said would happen. So it looks like neither bill is going to pass before the end of the year. And it's stuck in the water. And the question is whether Manchin's even going to vote for it at all. Dave.
Yeah, this is a trying time here, I would say. So the two pieces of what we're talking about, we'll talk about them independently. But one is the Build Back Better, budget reconciliation bill. Secondarily are the voting rights bills, the package of voting rights bills that are supposedly also being considered to pass in the next 2 weeks before the break, or even less because it's before Christmas. So we're talking like a week and change here at this point. So it's really crunch time for both of these bills. The Manchin thing is extremely frustrating, I think, because when in our system, we're not actually engaging him about what he's really thinking or what he actually wants to see or hear. This is all supposedly happening behind closed doors, and we're getting tidbits of this and that. But just a rational person thinking about the merits of this, a $6 trillion bill becomes a $3 trillion bill, becomes a $1.7 trillion bill, in part because Manchin says, I won't vote for anything above 1.75 trillion. So it's 1.7 trillion. Well, then he says, I don't like the funding mechanisms and I don't want to raise taxes. So if you're not going to raise taxes, your funding mechanism is severely limited. And then now we're looking at the child tax credit. He doesn't like that it's only being funded for 1 year, but the bill's being written for 10 years. Okay, sounds reasonable on the face of it. But a 10-year child tax credit at $300 per child in America is $1.4 trillion. So the child tax credit component of the existing bill that's funded for 1 of 10 years, extend that one line item out for 10 years, and it's the majority. It's 80% of the entire bill. So it's a non-starter in any rational conversation, but that's not where we are. So this is an irrational conversation. It's window dressing. It's kicking the can. It's saying what you need to do. And I have nothing personal against Manchin, but I do, there's enough evidence out there. You can find it. He's running flack for people who just don't want to spend the money, and he's got an agenda. So separate from that, though, is the voting. And that's a little bit shorter of a story because, like you said, Kyrsten Sinema, she came out and she basically said, yeah, I'm not doing that. She has a spokesperson. I'll give the quote here. Senator Sinema continues to support the Senate's 60-vote threshold to protect the country from repeated radical reversals in federal policy, which would cement uncertainty, deepen divisions, and further erode Americans' confidence in our government. So that's the thing. That's the shield of let's not talk about this. But in reality, that's not going to fly. This is, if it's a first principle, if voting is the underlying mechanism by which democracy functions, and voting suppression is a strategy out there, then if you have conviction, then you got to see through this, and clearly she does not.
Yeah, no, I mean it's we're stuck again. We're exactly where we were. The progressives had they had a little bit of leverage. Now there's no leverage. I mean, basically, it's just that they don't care about the Biden agenda. They don't really want this stuff to pass. It's got stuff that their particular constituencies don't like. So, they have it. And as far as Sinema's concerned, yeah, she does not care about the voting rights. That's not her agenda at all. She's probably going to have a hard time getting reelected as it is. And if more people of color in her state get to vote, that's probably going to make it hard for her to win her primary. So, I mean, it's just the way it is because of the stand she's taken. So I don't think she's certainly not invested in it. And it is about the most cynical politics I've seen in a long time. And it's just so blatant. Manchin didn't like the questions he was was getting at a press when he was caught outside the office today, and he started yelling. He says, "I'm not negotiating with you guys," and yelled an epithet. And then said and went back into his office. I mean, he's on the defensive about it, but he had made a deal. There are certain things you don't do. You don't back off of a deal when you shake hands with the president. You just don't do that, right? In American politics, that's just not something you do. And apparently Biden's in real shock. Well, I don't know about shock, but it's just that's not something you do. They thought they had a deal. They thought they were going to have this thing passed by Christmas with a few tweaks here and there, and apparently Manchin is just out in the ozone with this, and it's a real problem because this is nobody's noticing. Everybody thought, oh, we'll get this great boost once we pass the infrastructure bill, but nobody notices road work being done. That's being done all the time. Okay, so you get a little bit more, and you'll get the signs up saying this was done by this particular act. They will notice things in Build Back Better. That will lead to new things, and a different kind of stuff. But there's just some people just either don't have the vision, or they have the vision of what they don't want.
Yeah. And I know we're wrapping up, but it's worth mentioning that these negotiations are still pretty intense. As recently as today, Manchin and Sinema met with a coalition of centrist senators. So John Tester from Montana and Tim Kaine from Virginia, Angus Young, independent from Maine. They're advocating for the workaround here. Right now I'm talking about the voting rights legislation. In particular, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which Manchin was part of that. He participated in it and made sure that there were, that he approved of all of the elements, making its passage look likely. But now Sinema is bad cop on their approach to this. So we'll see if it's what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks. But it's not. It doesn't look good for any of this to happen before the break.
I, Richard Billhouse Nixon, do solemnly swear.
I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear. So help me God.
Last topic is kind of a general topic. We are talking about the politics of COVID, the state of where they are. We have a new variant, and every time it seems like we're making any progress, a new variant comes out. We still have plenty of skepticism, people getting tired. They're fatigued with it. They're tired of some people are tired of being pressured to get the vaccine. Other people are saying, God, I got boosted. Now we're losing immunity. I got vaccinated. Now we're losing immunity. I got to get booster. Am I going to have another booster later? And people are tired of wearing masks. They're tired of having to worry about this, and they're blaming the leadership, and governors are saying that the citizens are just fed up about it. But in the meantime, people are dying. We've just hit 800,000 in the United States. Even countries like Israel, which had really done well to get its people vaccinated, but just looks like the immunity just isn't lasting as long as people had hoped before we have to get boosters. And nobody's advocating a fourth shot at this point in time. And but we just can't get enough people vaccinated to get anything like herd immunity. And on top of it, there's countries of the world that have hardly been vaccinated at all, so we can't even get that stuff down to them. We can't make enough, and we can't get it distributed enough. Are we going to see an end to this, Dave?
Well, I mean, I wish I knew. It appears to me that this is going to be similar to a cold and a flu in the sense that it's a new thing to worry about on the regular. But the question is it going to be as severe as it's been? I did some just rough number crunching last week, and with we currently have about a 1% relationship between people that test positive and people who die. So it's not like it was in the very beginning when we understood a lot less about it. But that said, coronavirus deaths did just recently pass 800,000 in our country, and the total number of cases is over 50 million. So it's at this pace we're talking. It's going to take 6 times longer than it has, to reach everybody, for us all to have that. At least that start of where our body can recognize naturally all the elements of it. Part of this, it's very technical, but part of this is that our choice of vaccine approach is not the traditional approach. The mRNA is different than the traditional approach, and the Johnson & Johnson approach was really I don't, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a medical professional in any way, but it's different than what some other scientists are working on. So for example, there's a vaccine under development in Cuba right now that's not targeting the spike proteins, it's targeting the actual body of the virus. So there's more work to be done, and also there are parts of our body that respond to viruses. So it's not just our antibodies, which there's great therapeutics out there, which will make it, two new therapeutics out there that are making it the survival rates and the severity of hospitalizations and impact are there's great progress there in terms of our therapeutics, but we are still seeing at this point, this new Omicron.
Omicron. There's also hope that Omicron, because it's less severe than Delta, might actually kind of crowd out the Delta and replace it, and therefore lead to fewer deaths.
Because the virus wants to spread to more people but not kill it, because it wants to keep replicating. So now that Omicron is in 33 states, and according to the CDC, about 3% of all the samples that we test only, but still that represents a 7-fold increase from just a week earlier. So it's spreading very quickly. And just as a reminder, about 1,200 people every day are still dying, and the last 100,000 deaths were just in the last 11 weeks. So it's still severe, but part of this that's Delta. Most of that's Delta. But part of what you talked about with this topic is fatigue. And I think fatigue is very real, in part because of the severity of our lockdowns, and in part because of the combativeness of people resisting either mask mandates or vaccinations mandates in the workplace. So we're hearing about it on the regular, and it's still impacting us. And people remember a time not that long ago when we thought that there was some light at the end of the tunnel, whereas right now we realize it's a marathon, and it's going to impact us. But we do have two sort of lanes going on in our country, and you and I talked about it a while ago, where there are areas where vaccination levels are low and they're feeling a bigger impact compared to areas where vaccinations are much higher. But also we're seeing in the data that the areas that are experiencing cold winter weather are actually getting upticks too. So places like New England, where vaccination levels are very high, they also have some of the highest cases right now, the numbers of cases, because of proximity, because people are fatigued about being protective, and they are now indoors as opposed to where we were, say, in the summertime. So it's a continuing story. The question is how much of this is going to play out in the courts versus how much of this is going to be politicized and propagandized.
Yeah, it's apparently it's going well with the kids. We just within the last month have opened up to having 5 to 12-year-olds be able to be vaccinated, and 20% have had at least their first shot. That's a lot faster than the adults. Of course, people don't want to take as many chances with their kids. I think they're doing that, but that so that could, and apparently kids are carriers of Omicron more so than adults. So it's they're looking at it, and we don't know if they were carriers of the Delta variant as much, but it is at any rate that's but we are still at. I don't know where we are with adults at this point. I was looking.
I just found
that.
it. Yeah.
Where are we?
In terms of vaccination rates, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So at least one dose in the 65 and up category. This is according to New York Times. It's 95% for 65-year-olds of one dose. But these are seniors, and 87% for fully vaccinated. So seniors who are at risk are self-selecting to be participating. But the 12 and up, what you were asking me, the 12 and up group, it's 83% at least one dose and 71% fully vaccinated.
A lot better than before.
Yeah, and then finally, all ages, when you take into account, everybody, it's 72% one dose and 61% fully vaccinated. So at the rate we're going right now, our vaccination levels are up. But that leads to two unfortunate realities. One is that, well, if we're losing 100,000 people in the last 10 weeks and we have high vaccination levels, there's more to the equation than we really are. Our public health messaging about participation and protection and mental health and staying calm is not enough for us to get through the science behind how this actually spreads. So that's one thing real quick. And then another thing too is that testing. So countries around the world, some countries have done a tremendous job when it comes to testing. But in fact, our country, it just, a report just came out that the tests that were released last year of infancy in the opening days of the virus, it turns out that the tests were false. They were flawed, rather. So there were the first wave of PCR tests that their design flaw. Here's a quote from I believe this is New York Times. It was supposed to be one of the most accurate types of test, the PCR test, but one of the probes would bind with one of the primers, creating a false positive. So if they did any kind of quality control, that would not have been released to the public. So we failed in the beginning when we designed tests, and our testing regimen now is going to be under immense stress. The CDC just released a message that said that we're going to need like 2 to 3 times the current tests that we have if the new strain turns out to be as prolific as we think it is, and we don't even have a really solid testing regimen in place right now as it is. So that should be, I would think that should be mission number 1 for public health officials right now, is to implement rigorous testing.
All right. Well, we'll see where we are in a couple of months, as we're heading into spring. But definitely people are tired of the subject and people are still dying. And but it is definitely, even with these rates, it is higher in lower vaccinated areas. So. Okay, that takes us to our final segment where we do our predictions. Dave, what do you have for us?
Well, the thing that seems to be front and center for everybody's attention, and I know I sound like a broken record here, but is it going to be the case that we get our stimulus package passed, our budget reconciliation package passed? And I think the answer, as I said last week, is yes. But last week I said I don't think it's going to make it before the holiday, and in this case I don't. I agree with my prediction from last week. I don't think it's going to happen. Unfortunately, I don't mean to laugh about it, but I think they're going to drag their feet. But then the other question, which is a new one, is the Voting Rights Act. I think when people reflect and realize this package of voting rights, that's the only way to prevent the onslaught against the voting system and democracy kind of as we know it, which is the bedrock first principle, as I alluded to it earlier. Anybody who wishes it to be the case that less people vote are misguided, and therefore they need to be in a sense defeated on this issue. So if the whole country is going to be at the hands of Senator Sinema, I just don't see that as a way to operate. So I'm going to be optimistic and say that the president has the muscle to push through a filibuster workaround for the Voting Rights Act. I think that is a first principle, highest priority of the administration.
All right. I got two predictions. One is the anonymous emails to Meadows, the one apologizing for not having overturned the election. I'm predicting that one is also Jordan because he's an idiot. My second prediction is coming back to California. There is a second map out, and maybe we'll talk about it next week. A second redistricting map. It places current incumbents Thompson and John Garamendi into the same district. Thompson, it's his district, so Garamendi's going to have to leave it. I believe he's going to cross over, maybe move into Tom McClintock's Republican district and try to run against him. It would favor McClintock, but it's got a bunch of Garamendi's voters, and he may actually try to run, even though it's R+10, and that may be one where the Democrats try to get it back, and we'll see what happens. All right. Well, we will be back next week. And until then, stay informed and stay engaged.